Welcome, everyone, to the AllInTent Spotlight. My name is Margaret Resce Milkint, and I am delighted to be joined today by Meghan Anzelc. Meghan is a doctor, a PhD, and she is my go-to on all things data and data storytelling. Meghan and I go back about 15 years, and it's been a joy to see her impact on the insurance industry, and I'm going to say beyond, Meghan. So I'll tell you all how this conversation really began. I've been hearing, like many of you, so much about ChatGPT, bias, AI. What is the impact on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? And I brought it to Meghan, as I often do. And I said, Meghan, will you come to the AllInTent Spotlight and will you educate this wonderful gathering, this community of leaders in diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? We are a living, breathing community here, everyone. We learn from each other, we grow, we share, and we take action, and we do it in a positive way. So with that lead in, Dr. Meghan, I'd love for you to introduce yourself to our community, and a warm welcome.
Thank you so much, Margaret. I'm really happy to be here. And as you said, right, we know each other a long time and spend a lot of time together in the insurance industry. I've done physics, I've done people analytics with executive search, which also overlaps with your own experience. So we've got lots of things to talk about, and I'm really happy to be here and share some of what I know and even some of the things I don't know.
Well, this is terrific, Meghan. And, I'm going to bring us to insurance because we are actionable. And I'm going to start out with the basics. I'd love for you to give our audience your definition of data bias, what that means generally, and what it means for us in insurance.
Sure, absolutely. So there's a lot of different ways that data can have bias. So I'm going to give you a few examples that hopefully will resonate, and then we can talk about how it relates to DEIB. So there are a number of different kinds of bias, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but one would be response bias. So an example would be Glassdoor reviews. My assumption is that most people that go to Glassdoor and give a review of their employer either love or hate their employer. There's probably not as many people in the middle. So that's a response bias, because the people that choose to respond and offer their input fall sort of on opposite ends of the spectrum, and you probably don't have as many people in the middle. Another kind of bias would be selection bias. So in the way that you sample data. So totally making this up, but all of the cat videos that are out there, if people only ever video their cat when the cat is doing something interesting, then the video data we have on cats is biased. It's biased to when cats do something interesting. And then another one would be like if you want to identify the best candidate for a job, or you're trying to think of who might be the best speaker for your event. If you and your team sit around and brainstorm ideas of who do you know who might be a good fit for the role, or who might be a great speaker for your event, it's likely that you are introducing recency bias, because it's normal for us as humans to think of people that we have interacted with recently, or talked to recently, or seen show up in our LinkedIn feed recently. We're less likely to think of people that we haven't talked to in a long time. And obviously, we're not going to think of people we've never met, right, or have never heard of. So that's an example of recency bias. If you think about how this all relates to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, there's a lot of different kinds of research around how bias is related to those topics. So a few examples again. So we've seen research that people use different language when writing performance review feedback on men versus women. And one very well-known example of this is the word aggressive. That word shows up in performance reviews of women, but typically does not show up in the performance reviews of men. And you can kind of understand the connotation, right? In men, it might be considered ambitious or go-getter, but in women, it's seen as aggressive, right? So that's one example. Related back to your opening about ChatGPT, there's a tool around inclusive language and an augmented writing tool in the market called Textio. And I'm not being paid by them. I just know of the tool and admire their work. And their CEO, Kieran Snyder, has done a lot of research using ChatGPT in some of these HR topics. So she's shown that gender and ethnic biases persist when you're using tools like ChatGPT to generate performance review feedback, or to help you craft job descriptions. So think of very like gender stereotypes of jobs, right? So I think one of the examples she gives is investment banker. Most of us probably just thought of a man, and so does ChatGPT. And so the language that it provides is much more, it either describes a man, even when you're not prompting it to the gender of the person to write the feedback about, or it uses language that sort of makes all of us think of men, right? So those sorts of examples. So in terms of what do we do about this? Because that probably puts a lot of confidence or sort of makes you feel good about the situation. It is a very difficult problem to fix, but there are some things you can do about it. So for example, back to the original Glassdoor example, Glassdoor could try to overcome the participation bias by soliciting input and reviews from a broader range of employees, as one example. They could also weight the input from people who love or hate their employers a bit differently to try to correct for the fact that their data is kind of clumpy in those two areas. Another technique that's often recommended is to anonymize and try to de-identify data. And that can be useful in certain situations, but in my opinion, I don't think that's the go-to solution without doing a lot of verification. So I wouldn't trust it to work automatically. And I say this because I've seen some of how this works on actual data. So I've seen in some reviews of resumes that if you remove all of the potentially identifying characteristics, so not just names or like women's colleges, but you also remove like very gendered sports like football or other kinds of things that you might think of as having kind of gender stereotypes behind them. If you remove all of that, almost to the point of removing useful information, it is still possible to guess for an algorithm to predict the gender of the person behind the resume with reasonable accuracy, so above chance, which means really that men and women, we write our resumes differently. So I would love to know how men are writing theirs and see how I could incorporate some of that language into mine. But the idea of anonymization is not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve all the problems. It can help in certain situations. So I think my main message is that this is a difficult problem, and it's going to take work and iteration and probably trying out a few different approaches to try to overcome some of it. My recommendation is really to use scientifically backed methods as much as possible to help combat bias. So everything from the things I know you do in your work, Margaret, of starting with a representatively diverse slate of candidates, using structured interviews, which we know there's a lot of research saying that helps to combat bias. And of course, all of us taking a step back and checking to see if we might unconsciously be allowing bias to creep into our assessment of people, right? Of sort of flip the script a bit of say, would I say that if the person was a different ethnicity or a different gender or whatever it may be, and sort of try to validate for yourself that you yourself are not allowing your unconscious bias to influence the process.
And Meghan, that was beautiful. And I'm so glad, because I'm going to play this and replay this, what you just gave us. Great insights, great learning. What I'm hearing and what I'm feeling from you is that we can combat this. We can take ownership that this isn't something that's going to sweep us away. I think that's what I'm hearing and I'm feeling from people is I don't want to be swept away by it. And I think you're giving us very actionable ways to combat this bias and not be taken over by AI, which is great. So I heard about a concept that I hadn't heard of before, and that is the concept of co-piloting. So could you explain to us what co-piloting is and how we can use it to help us as we combat bias?
Yeah, so that term has started showing up in the news, I think, really around some of these emerging AI tools. So Microsoft actually calls their tool Copilot, right? So there's sort of a branded version of that word now. Google has something similar that they call Duet. Lots of other large companies and medium-sized companies are launching their own tools, all with their own names. The common idea behind all of these is that there are ways to incorporate AI and generative AI into all of our day-to-day workflows in ways that are relatively seamless and help us be more efficient with our time. So for instance, likely all of us have seen the autocomplete features in our email tools, right? Whether we're using Microsoft or Google or something else, the idea that you start typing a sentence and it suggests either the next set of phrase or maybe even complete the sentence for you. So the idea behind these co-pilot type products is similar. The idea is to kind of integrate AI and generative AI in ways that help you be more effective and efficient. So things like drafting a presentation automatically off of a handful of internal documents, right? So maybe your quarterly earnings summary and your last board presentation, right? Something like that, and say, generate me a summary of this that I can share with the board. Other things could be around not just text, but video and sound. So for example, identifying who is speaking in a conference room full of people and doing that using AI, so that perhaps if some of us are physically in a conference room and some of us are virtual, everybody who's on the call knows who it is who's speaking and contributing to the meeting. So they're really meant to integrate into how we do our work today and be more efficient with our time. So that's really the concept behind them.
And it's a great concept. And, I love the visual of it because it is, a human being partnering with AI that I can use Chat GPT to make me be more efficient and maybe feel a little bit smarter, but I can put my own personal touch on it. And I can make sure that biases are addressed, that my own voice is used and not AI's voice. And it gives me back my control, frankly, and my peace of mind. So I'm hopefully balancing the best of both worlds. Is that a practical way for us to think about this, Meghan?
Yes, absolutely. And I would say, especially with some of these very emerging tools, right, like the generative AI pieces, it's really, really essential to make sure you're reviewing and considering the content that's being generated before you just go use it. And we've seen examples in the news where companies got that wrong, right, and had a PR gaffe or sometimes let IP go into the public market. So absolutely, you need human in the loop for how you're using these tools, both so that we all get more comfortable with them, but also because there are some risks to them, right? There's the idea of hallucinations, that they can make up information, right? I think someone at a dinner last week said, it's like my really overly confident 6-year-old. And you're like, yep, that's about right. And that's
we can
one.
laugh about it and we can laugh about it, but these are real stories that are happening right now. So, we know that
Absolutely.
there's ethical debates going on and we want to be front and center. We want to be aware. And
Yeah.
that's the learning living community that we have here at AllInTent, Meghan. We want to learn. We want to help each other. We want to keep advancing the needle and accelerating. But sometimes you have to go slow to go fast. So you've really given us some great insights. Got a few more questions for you here, Meghan. And I know that you have lived and breathed in insurance. You know, we're such a data-driven industry. What do you think makes insurance so unique? You know, it's data strength, it's data power. Really, there's so much power with data. Any thoughts about that? Because I think that is part of this bigger narrative, you know, and maybe there's a leadership role here for the insurance industry. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with you. So I think about data being so integral to the insurance industry, because if you think of really down to the foundational purpose of insurance, right, to manage risk, and to be able to recoup losses when losses happen. So that whole concept of being able to both identify risk and then segment it or understand it, all of that relies on data. So that really is core to the soul of the industry. Um, I think what we're starting to see in the insurance industry is the realization, and sort of the widening of the perspective to say data is not just important to the core of who we are as an industry, but it's also important to other adjacent or even other aspects of our business. So customer experience and how we market, how we build distribution channels, how we service claims, right? All of those pieces, there are ways to continue to use data and use it in more sophisticated ways that give a better experience to everybody involved in the insurance ecosystem.
I think there's a challenge in there too, Megan, because as we evangelize and brand and reimagine the insurance industry, I think that people like you, data leaders, data storytellers, data evangelists, my data go-to, you can make the difference and we can all lift you up. And that's what AllInTent is all about. So I have to shift the spotlight to STEM. You are an original STEM girl, young woman, CEO, entrepreneur. It's terrific. And we do want to celebrate you and all STEM careers in insurance. So, my last question for you, Megan, is what advice do you have to those STEM women out there, those STEM young girls who are thinking about a career in STEM? Why insurance and why now?
Yeah, I really like that question. So I think most people kind of fell into the insurance industry. It's not one that I really was very aware of when I was looking at different career paths, but I found it to be fascinating and challenging and interesting, and so I stayed for a decade. And I think it's kind of a hidden gem. I think it's an industry that I'm not sure does a good job of its own PR at times. But the business problems in insurance are really challenging and interesting. And I personally am someone who has always really enjoyed challenging problems. And I like to get to see the impact of the work I do on the organizations that I work with. And that has been true in all of my experiences in the insurance industry. I think for those who are considering paths in data science and AI and those sorts of areas like mine, I think these are capabilities, like I said, that the insurance industry has used for decades. And so it's an industry that understands the value, the importance of those skill sets and how to do it in ways that are responsible and ethical, right? It's a highly regulated industry. I think as the insurance industry starts expanding the breadth of the kinds of ways they think about utilizing these capabilities, to me, that means that the opportunities then broaden for people considering a path into this industry. Right now, there will be not just the historical kind of roles in pricing or in claims, but now there will be things kind of across the breadth of the industry and many different ways to engage and get involved, that are challenging and fulfilling and allow you to sort of learn and grow in your own career. So I think it's a really interesting time for the industry, and the backgrounds that come from STEM and data science and AI, right? This sort of tipping point almost of that broadening of opportunity aligned with, more people coming in and much more diverse groups of people joining the industry and coming through the pipeline of STEM backgrounds. So I'm excited.
Absolutely. Well, I am with you. I am so excited about this. And I think we're at an inflection point, in the industry. And I think data is a big tool in our wonderful toolkit that we have. So many intersections, so many connection points. And you're absolutely right, Megan. We can go beyond the traditional and people thinking, well, it's just, data analytics or actuarial, which are fabulous STEM careers. But there's talent analytics, there's marketing analytics, there's finance, there's technology, digital, risk management. I mean, everything, underwriting, product management. I'm going to keep going here, claims analytics. And you think about the power that we can harness and the good that this industry can do. And we are doing it. We just need to do more, and we need to accelerate, and we need to put this spotlight on STEM. So we are so happy, Megan, that you joined us, Dr. Megan, that you joined us today. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your light. Thank you for the energy that you bring to all of us, especially the insurance industry. And for all of you that are part of AllInTent, thank you. Thank you for all you do. Share and spread this great message. And until next time, be well, be strong, lift each other, make a difference out there. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Dr. Megan. Bye-bye.